have an opportunity to talk, to ask questions, etc. And if I don't have the answers, which chances are I don't, somebody in the room may. So we'll just have a kind of use this as kind of an open forum so that maybe I can, or somebody else in the room can field it. Where do we start? Anybody? Anybody got something? Here we go. Got a couple.
Do you think school districts like to pay for the education of soft skills?
I don't think school districts like to pay for anything.
Well, that's true.
I don't think they like to pay for it, but the question, I think the bigger question is there a responsibility? I mean, they might say, well, really, soft skills is something that you learn at home. We just teach the hard skills, and you could probably be right in justifying that, but that doesn't eliminate the problem, which is employers are not satisfied with the current workforce, and most of it is soft skills related. In fact, I read recently in Forbes magazine, they quoted an article, and I'll be happy to send the article. It was Leadership Inc., a global think tank, did a study. They followed 20,000 new hires for a period of 18 months. So imagine, you're going to track 20,000 people who just got a job. Now, the job could be an entry-level basic minimum wage job all the way to the C-suite, making insane amount of money, whatever, but they followed a total of 20,000 people for 18 months that just got a job. And over 18-month period of time, they realized 46% were no longer with the companies that hired them. There was almost a 50% failure rate. But the interesting thing is they went back and they asked the employers, what happened? And of the 46% of the people that failed in their jobs, 89% of the response was they didn't possess the soft skills. They alluded to one of the things that we just, they didn't show up. They weren't professional. They spent too much time doing this. We couldn't trust them. They were a negative influence on the rest of our team, etc. So employers are screaming, please, help us with these. Now, do school districts want to play for soft skills? No. Nope, they don't. They want to turn around and go, back in the day, kid learned to work at mom and dad, right? And we bring them into school, although teachers like Mr. Davies were the architects of our soul. So I think it was a combination. Now what are communities screaming for? Every kid's got to fill out the corresponding bubble on a standardized achievement test. Because as you know and I know, most schools have the same mission statement. 1,500 different schools. I think every one of them that I visited should paint so everyone can see what their mission is right there as you walk into the school. We're preparing our students for Harvard, a practice I call Preparation H. But the reality is, we're trying to make them successful in the workplace, right? We want to help them, give them an advantage. So should we? Can we? Do we like to? No. Is it a must? In my opinion, it is. And maybe it is in your opinion too. It's like we desperately need something to help us. I just couldn't find a soft skills curriculum. I'm not saying that there's not one out here now, but when I started the A-game stuff, there was nothing. There was nothing that taught, inculcated. And as I started to write the A-game book, the Bring Your A-Game to Work, I said, my kids aren't going to want to hear me say, if you don't do this, this is what happens. And you better learn to clean up your act, young man. They didn't want to hear that. So I created the A-game materials based upon peer-to-peer dialogue. So you'll see a lot of video inserts where kids are talking about, why do I have to wear that stupid looking uniform? Why do I have to do this? Why is he getting on my back? And then the peers answer the question. So the information comes from them. Well, this is what I think, this is what I've heard, this is what my boss says, etc. So peer-to-peer rather than in the face. And it seemed to work a lot better. Plus it's kind of fun, so that doesn't hurt. Good question. Anybody else? Yeah.
I think you're starting to answer some of my questions. I just really appreciate your message about the work ethic and needs for the workforce. I'm at a community college, and a really constant message, as you know and affirmed from employers that we meet with and the faculty, is this issue. And one of the things I was going to ask if you could comment a little further on is when you talk about some of these concepts like make it clear, make it matter, I think faculty might say, or employers, that we feel like we're doing that and they still don't care. And you started just explaining that. Maybe could you expand on that? Is it a different technique, or is there data to show how you do this, make it clear, make it matter? Well, it helps? Or?
And I think that's a good question. You go back and say, let's imagine that the young waitress, server, I guess is the more politically correct term, the young server who said, I got a rag, right? So if you interviewed the manager, we focus on customer service. Service, 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 we focus on it. But here's the problem. It is clear. give good customer service. What's not clear is what does that mean? What does that look like? We don't really understand that. What do you mean service? Like I got her what she asked for. You could see there was an element of, or come on, you caught us on a bad day. They don't understand there is no such thing in business as an acceptable bad day. That you can't just turn around and go, well, you know what, if you have 364 good days, you can take the 365th off. It's like every day is important, every single day, every customer, every time, every service. So what does that mean? That means, not just in that scenario, but what we're doing in our curriculum, in our classroom, we first have to make sure that we're speaking in a dialogue they understand. And the only way to do that is first to assess what they already know. Right? You can't just go, okay, everybody is at the same speed and we're all going to talk about customer service. What does customer service, that's old school. What you need to do is figure out, pick away at the scab. Where's the pain? Where have you really felt like you ordered this and you got that and you were upset? And then you got on the phone and you called somebody and what happened? They didn't answer. And then you placed this and da-da-da-da-da. So now all of a sudden, well, can you imagine how would you have solved that problem? It's not just giving them the answers, it's having them create the answers that helps them inculcate that. So that's just a customer service example, but it applies to whatever in the soft skills realm, Michael, you're talking about. It's like, how do we do that? How do we find clarity? Well, what do they really know? And yes, a lot of the employers would say, well, we told them here's the dress code, wear steel-toed shoes every day. Why? Why do I have to wear steel-toed shoes? And maybe, well, because OSHA makes you. Well, what's OSHA? I don't know. I'm in the cab of a truck every day. I'm not going to get anything dry. I'm not carrying beams. It's stupid. Well, what does that mean? I hate to say you have to explain it to them because in some situations you got to say, look, do it or you can't. I get that. But there's a lot of old school hierarchy. Because I said so. I say jump, you say how high. And millennials, as I prove the title of my book, Employing Generation Y, are going, why? I don't get it. Okay, I'll dance for you while you're watching. I'll do my little dance for you as long as you're here. But as soon as you walk away, I'm going to do it my way. Because I really don't think you kind of get it. I don't think you kind of understand. And that's the problem, is that we can get them to do what we want them to do when we're standing right over and we're making them. But that's manipulation. And the motivation comes from, I get it, I'm a part of that. If you haven't toured the nerdery, and I don't even know if they allow public tours, but that's why I'm so cool, that's why I'm so excited to create this video, because I want people to see what a cool workplace environment is. Because this is 500 IT techies, very smart people. Every one of these people who work there were the smartest kid in their class. They're probably the smartest kid in their school. Now they're among 500 other smartest kids in the school. So you can just imagine the proprietary ego that may get in the way. But you know what their core values are? Number one core value at the nerdery is be humble. Be humble says, it doesn't matter how long you've been here. It doesn't matter how much money you make or what title you have on your business card. The best idea wins. We're going to get together, and if we all have an idea, it doesn't matter. You've only been here for 3 days, and you've been here for 6 years, and you make a whole lot more money. I don't have to turn around and go, oh, but she makes more money than I do. So they appeal to the mindset that says, I've got a better idea, right? And so everybody's working together for the greater cause. Different way to run a company. Can we infuse that into our classroom? I think we can. Wouldn't it be cool if our school systems ran like that? Rather than, well, but wait a second, everybody's got to have their say. It's like, best idea wins. An amazing way to run a company. All right, I'm going way off topic. Somebody else.
Hi, I have a question about how do you, what would you suggest for just the device addiction that is happening today? Just if you go into a restaurant, if you walk down the halls of our college, everybody's got a device in their hands. They're so disengaged. How do we deal with that as educators? Do you have any advice or, experience with dealing with that? I mean, that happens on the job. It happens at school.
The question is device addiction. All right, so I don't know when you graduated from school. When I graduated, you know what my graduation present was? It was a Rockwell calculator. It would add, subtract, multiply, and divide. Nobody in my family had ever been to college before. But my dad I was the first kid to go to college, and my dad had never set foot on a college campus, but he just thought, you're going to college, you probably need one of these. So he went out and he spent one half of 1 week's paycheck, $96, buying a Rockwell calculator. A year later, they were sold for $9. Now they give them away, right? Oh, by the way, it did have a percent key on it, but I didn't know how to use it, so I used it 0% at the time. The point is, the number one graduation present this past year for the class of 2014 was a smartphone, like either a Droid or an iPhone. Now just imagine when you were back in school if somebody would have given you the technology of an iPhone. First of all, it didn't exist. If somebody would have handed me, I mean, there was no such thing, but I mean, the computing power of an iPhone back when I was in school would have filled up this entire room with mainframe equipment. It cost millions of dollars. It would have taken 6 engineers to run. But now we hand them to high school kids and grade school kids, right? The average age of get your first cell phone use has dropped down in America to below 10 years of age. We're handing in these supercomputers. I mean, you think about what your phone will do. It's access to anything. Any music, any song, any television program, any video game, access information, every book that's ever been written. I mean, you can take photographs, create videos that are in more spectacular than the technology used to film Jaws or Star Wars, and we give that to young people, and we say, well, they're entitled? Well, wait a second, we're the ones that gave it to them. We gave them this device, and then we go, well, why are they so amused or so impressed? Why do they constantly keep their nose in the face of these devices? And we even ridicule them. If somebody would have handed you a supercomputer back when you were in school, would you have said, hey, put this on the shelf, let's go out and play Frisbee? No, I mean, it's a fabulous device. That's where their attention is. The problem is their overuse of that and how that drives people crazy. So one of the companies I work for created something really cool up here. Okay, so you see the little QR code, right? This is Tony Roma's. Now, Tony Roma's decided what they were going to do is they went, all these servers and the bus staff and the cooks, they walk around with their smartphones all the time. And then Jesse Braves, the vice president of training and development, said, well, why don't we turn it into a learning device? Okay? If they're going to walk around with it rather than continue to take away from them, use it, but use it for our good. So you would come up with that little QR code up there and you'd go, okay, this is a slicer. How many people have ever cleaned a slicer before? A few hands go up. Most people go, I don't know how to clean a slicer. Well, I don't know how to clean one either. But you'll know how to clean one in about 40 seconds. And this is only one half of the video. Here's how it goes. You'd click that with you'd stand back with your phone, you'd click that, and you can later, and this is what you'd get.
The slicer should be cleaned after every use. This will prevent cross-contamination and the spread of bacteria. Ensure the slicer is unplugged and set at 0. Disassemble the carriage tray and the blade guard. Fill a sink with hot, soapy water.
Okay, that's all the farther that I'll show you, but this video lasts for another 30 seconds. By the time it's done, you know how to clean a slicer, even if you've never used a slicer before, because what did they do? They took that device and said, we're going to use it as a training tool. Now, I've showed this to some people, and they said, how much money did it cost them to produce that? How much would you guess? Zero. Zero. Why? Because all you need is your little smartphone, and you say, hey, you know how to clean a slicer? Yeah, go ahead and clean it. Let me just video you. You stand there and you clean it. As soon as you're done, you take that video and you post to YouTube. How much does that cost? That's 0, right? Yeah, no, it's posted to YouTube. Now what do you get? YouTube, you get a little URL. Then you go to QR codes, right? QRcodes.com or whatever, and you take that video code or that URL code, you feed it into there, and they give you one of those squiggly things, one of those QR codes. Done. So somebody is saying, so think about the question that you get asked most frequently. Oh God, I'm so sick and tired of being asked that question. Make a great video. All I'm trying to show you is, it's like, okay, we have this problem, we have this problem, we have this problem. Let's back up from the problem and let's look at it in a different way. If they're using the cell phone, they're always using the cell phone. Well, wait a second, maybe that's a good thing rather than a bad thing. Maybe I can leverage that. Maybe it can be trained. So you go to a Tony Roma's, you will find 50 of those QR codes strategically placed around there. They will teach you how to make a signature drink, you know, how to cook a steak, etc. You can figure it out. So now you have a training tool. They've armed people with training tools rather than taking away. Now, was it a school district recently who said, you know, every student brings, he said, well, how do we struggle with the cell phone usage? They basically have put, have you ever been to one of those Brazilian steakhouses where they give you a little red and green thing? You know, like if you go to I don't know, Rodizio or one of these, I don't know. If you go to a Brazilian steakhouse where the little gachos walk around with the lamb shanks and they give you a little red and green thing. As long as you've got your thing on your table set on red, they won't bring you food. But as soon as you go, well, I'd like to try some of that, these guys are walking around with, you turn it over to green and they bring you, and then they slice you the pork or whatever, and you get it. So that's their dining philosophy. Well, the red or green thing works at this one particular school. Basically what they do is a teacher in every classroom can turn a little monitor on in the room that says red or green. And basically what they've done is said, when we're on green, it's okay to use your smartphones. And when you're on red, you can't use your smartphones. Now here's the deal. If somebody is using the smartphones when we're on red, the whole class loses their privilege. So rather than peer pressure, now it's peer power. It's like, put that stupid thing away. Instead of the teacher going, put that stupid thing away. Right? Because everybody wants their privilege. So at some time when it's okay to use your phone, to do some research, to look up a Wikipedia, to whatever, there is a time and a place, rather than you can never use your cell phones. Because that's going to go out of style before too much longer. They become an extension of our arm. So is it for you? I don't know. All I'm saying is, how do you get a hold of technology? You have to realize how powerful these devices are, why they captivate the attention, and then can you leverage them in the workplace to get them working for you instead of working against you? Sorry for the clumsiness of that, but maybe that answers the question. Next one. Anybody else? Yes?
So my school's looking at a new grading initiative where behavior is not going to be part of that grade. It's a matter of having students, what's the word I'm looking for? Master classes or master the skills. And behaviors, attendance is something that we are looking at taking out of that final grade. I guess I'm wondering if anybody in here has some views on that, or what your view on that would be.
I would first of all like to hear your view on that.
Well, given that I teach CTE classes, I mean, behaviors is part of it. I mean, and it's about the soft skills. And our principal goes to these workshops too. I mean, he's very on board with CTE, but having these discussions at our school, I guess, I don't want to say how do I convince him that these skills are important to be, graded on, but maybe the other challenge is, how do you grade those skills?
Oh, we did the same thing in Colorado. We had a problem with pot, so we just said, hey, legal. Seriously, just if you have a problem, then just go ahead and get rid of the rule. I don't think it's a good idea. I mean, I don't know. Maybe the reason they took it out is they didn't know how to enforce it. So we won't. I can't imagine teaching in a school where you didn't have some leverage over a person's behavior, and that leverage may be what they want, which is their behavior. If the only way to curb behavior is to throw them out, I don't know. I wasn't a compliant kid. Maybe that helps me when I stand in front of students, is I was the troublemaker. So if you go into a gymnasium looking at 2,000 kids you've never met before, someone hands you a microphone, first of all, you find God pretty fast, right? It made me a religious man. You find God real fast. You're looking at a lot of kids looking at you going, what's this guy going to do? But more than that, I took the mindset of a troublemaker. I had to appeal to the person in the classroom who was in that school, that was most like me, most wanted to take over and go, you think you're going to have the attention of these students? Wait till you see what I got planned for you. If I could take that mindset, I could defeat that mindset. If I thought everyone in there was just this perfect Susie shortcake that was going to sit in the front and laugh at all the jokes and stand and clap, I was toast. So the problem is, if in a school, if you take out the behavioral part of it and you say, look, it's just all based upon what you do on a achievement test, that's your only grade. You've taken one of the guns out of somebody's holster. I don't know. I don't know. So I'm not a big fan. I'd have to hear more. Somebody would have to convince me of how that's done. But in my classroom, there'd still be a behavioral element. I would just work it in somehow. I was a DECA advisor. I gave people DECA dollars. You had to buy your grade. Right? Seriously, I figured my grading system, and this is again back in the 80s before there were all, it was very simple. It was an economic system. I gave out I had printed DECA dollars. My picture went in them. It said, "In chess we trust." It was a chess buck, right? And I had different denominations. So for example, payday. Payday was on Fridays, and depending on how many days you were there on time, punctual, you'd get paid, right? You'd get a certain amount of deca dollars, and for answering questions correctly, you'd get a certain currency. So you would buy your grade at the end, and it was based upon who was the wealthiest in the class, and so it was an opportunity. And I know you're right now going, that seems like a nightmare. And there were parts, it was a learning experience. But by the same token, there was a lot of it that was behavioral. Because if you brought me an Egg McMuffin, I'm giving you some deca dollars. So, it's just Anyway, my point is, I don't know. I'm kind of speechless. Does anybody else have a thought on that? Yes.
I teach some assessment courses, and I'm actually a big fan of standards-based grading from the standpoint that it cleans up what the grade stands for. What's missing in this process is we need to have standards and a grade category for task management or workplace skills. That's what we need, and then we would honor those things, and we'd be able to give a clean grade for that employers would be able to look at and see. So I think the solution is not to avoid standards-based grading, but to put grades out there for what we value and what we want kids to know when they leave. And it'll be something in addition to math. It'll be task management skills or soft skills or whatever we want to call them. And I think that's the way to solve that problem.
Back there.
I was just meeting with some people from the Workforce Center, and they said we're not calling them soft skills anymore. We're calling them essential skills. And I really liked that because it is essential in the marketplace.
Yeah, I think that's a great. I've heard them labeled other things. It's just it doesn't matter what one group labels it. It's what's the general consensus. It'll probably take a while before a tagline like that becomes public domain and everybody goes, well, these are the essential skills. But there are still those that would argue and say, nah, it's the critical thinking skills, it's the science and the math. And again, I'm not saying that those aren't important, because they are important. The nerdery isn't going to hire somebody who has no ability to compute math functions. That's not it. What they're saying is, yes, we want technical people. But if we had a technical person that was shoddy with workforce or soft skills, work ethic, or we had somebody who was probably maybe a C-level student when it comes to the technology, but had the soft skills, we'd rather have that person. I think that's what they're saying. Not we want somebody who's totally ignorant as long as they know how to show up for work on time. That's not it. But yeah, I think they are essential skills, and I hadn't quite heard that term before, but I like that. Yeah, they are essential skills. Yeah. Anyone else? Other questions? I want to share with you what really intrigued me about work ethic, because I wanted to take a historic view of what happened with work ethic in America. And I came across an article one time that really piqued my imagination. I'll share that with you here. It was I think you'll find that it does go hand in hand with the topic of work ethic. But I had read about this Lincoln when in 1860 he was a candidate for the United States presidency. But if you look at your history, you realize that Lincoln was beardless. And an 11-year-old girl from Worcester, Massachusetts, wrote a letter to Abe and said that he would look more presidential if he grew a beard. Well, Lincoln was a listener, and he grew a beard. Now, that created a big problem for an entrepreneur who was from Massachusetts. In fact, Springfield, Massachusetts. The entrepreneur's name was Milton Bradley. You probably remember that name. Well, Milton Bradley was a lithographer, and he had this lithograph of a beardless Lincoln that hung everywhere. And all of a sudden, the lithograph, which was a long, complex process, was obsolete. And so Milton Bradley had to find some other way to make a living. What he decided to do was to take his lithograph skills and create a board game. And the board game that he created was called the Checkered Game of Life. Now, the only board game at the time was checkers, and so his board looked like a checkerboard. And players started out the lower left-hand corner of the board, a space called infancy, and they'd move throughout the board till they got to the final space, a space they called happy old age, 50. It was a point game. Players were given points for landing on certain spaces. Like they'd win points if they landed on ambition or perseverance or honesty or bravery when they landed on those spaces, but they would be docked points if they landed on spaces representing vices like crime and intemperance and idleness and gambling. You see, Milton Bradley had made his money and he decided to make meaning. And he wanted to teach young people, who are the targeted game players, that there was a connection between hard work, sacrifice, character values, and success. That in America, unlike the old country, you didn't have to be born into wealth, that you could pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and if you would subscribe to this core work ethic, these soft skills that we've been talking about, well, you could become successful in whatever your craft was. We remember that was back in 1860. And something amazing happened over the next 100 years in America, because we went from a period of the Civil War to a period of the civil rights. And in the same 100 years, 18 men followed Abe Lincoln to that Oval Office. And in that 100-year span of time, America changed. We tamed the Wild West. We proved ourselves successful in 2 world wars, and we even managed to survive the Great Depression. So now fast forward to the 1950s, where television had been introduced, as had the concept of rock and roll. And so, back in 1960, the Milton Bradley Company decided to relaunch that game. Only this time they didn't call it the checkered game of life. They simply called it what? The game of life. The game of life, well, it was endorsed by an American icon, Art Linkletter. And it no longer looked like a checkerboard. In fact, the game of life looked more like a windy road. Players were given little cars that had holes in them, and they would put pegs in them representing family members as they scurried their way throughout the board. But the goal was no longer to land in happy old age. Now the goal was to land in millionaire acres, and to avoid at all costs landing in the poor farm. Now, how would players acquire their wealth? It was very simple. The game board was littered with paydays. At every twist and every turn, players would get handfuls of cash handed to them by a banker for just landing on a space. But what broke the tie was the special spaces and special cards. You see, if you landed on a space that meant you had a life event like an anniversary or a graduation, other players were obligated to hand you money. Or if you landed on a lucky day space, you win a cash windfall, but you didn't have to keep that cash windfall, because you could spin the little teetotum in the middle for an opportunity to gamble that away for 2 or 3 times as much money. And then something happened back in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s. They introduced this concept of the share the wealth cards. Share the wealth cards allowed one player to take another player's cash windfall, right? Or make the other player pay a portion of their taxes for them. You see, the game was no longer about hard work and sacrifice. It was now all about just getting the bling. How much could you get? How soon could you get it? How are you going to be able to capture your wealth? Well, over the past 55 years since that game was reintroduced, you've probably seen a wide variety of these editions. In fact, maybe you even have some on your own game shelf. And every cover of the box looks kind of iconic, representing what America was like during that specific period of time. So if you were to go today to a Walmart or to a Target and buy the Game of Life, this is what the box edition looks like. And if you look at the cover, it's pretty indicative of how we're trying to train our kids, right? What life is supposed to be. You're supposed to be having fun with your family and out there just having a gay old time. And you can see it's no longer a Milton Bradley company. Now it's all a Hasbro company. Hostile takeover. What have we taught our kids? We've taught them that money grows on trees, right? And what if you don't like your lot in life? What if you wind up in some place you don't like? Well, it's very simple to quit. You can simply quit the game of life. But what's more telling is the object. Have you ever wondered what's the meaning of life? Haven't we been asking ourselves that since we became a species? It's right there on the box. Do whatever it takes to retire in style with the most wealth at the end of the game. That's the object of the game of life. Do whatever it takes. Is there anyone in here that's not trying to retire in style? Look at the first 4 words. Think about it. Do. What does do mean? Do means what? Work. Whatever it takes. What's that a question of? Ethic. Because whatever it takes for you, Mike, might be too much for you, Candy, and not enough for you. See, do whatever it takes is a work ethic question. It's right there on the box. And you think about how much has really changed, how society has changed, and what messages we're sending. And I recently sat down with a family member of mine that is going into the military, made a decision. He actually leaves on Monday for Army boot camp. And since he's graduated from high school, he struggled with what he's going to do. And he's looked at all the various military options. And he sat down with recruiters from the Army and the Navy and the Air Force and the Coast Guard. And he sat back and he's compared the deals. You know, how long am I in for? What do I get when I get out? Or when I get out of this training, what kind of training will I have? Where will you send me? What's going to happen? He's been asking these questions. Now he's really nervous because he's going to boot camp, and it's Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri, and he leaves on Monday, and it's very cold there, and he's worried about boot camp. And we sat down and recently talked, and I said, Blake, you've gone through this whole long conversation about going into the military, and you've thoroughly examined all the various branches, and you've made your choice based upon what's best for you, haven't you? And he said, yeah. And I said, let me ask you a question. Has there been any time through this entire process you've ever sat back and said, I'm doing what's right for my country? See, we don't think that anymore. There's not a person in this room that would be here if that's the way our fathers and our grandfathers and our grandmothers thought, if they all thought about, what do I get? Who's going to give me the best deal? What do I get? That me bubble. Instead of, I'm going to go off and serve my country. It's the thing to do. It's how I'm called. Now, that's just Blake. I'm not saying that there's nobody that enters the military thinking that way anymore, but most people approach work in terms of, what do I get? What are you going to do for me? How much can I get if I do this? If I dance for you, how long do I, before I get a break, before I get to sit down, before I get that corporate office, before I get what I want? How many of us really look and say, it's about giving the very best that you have? And you look at this Milton Bradley game, and it kind of seems simple as we go through life, but historically, you see the transition between what can I give? What kind of a person can I be? And now, is there a shortcut? Is there a get-rich-quick scheme? Is there a point and click? Can I be the next Mark Zuckerberg and just come up and become a dot-com millionaire if I come up with this idea, and then we can just take it public, and the next thing you know, I'll be able to call ship to shore, and gravy will start rolling in. It's what an opportunity we have, I think, in CTE to make an impact, to make a difference, and to get people thinking differently than perhaps maybe they think. Again, do we have to answer all the questions, or get people to just question their answers and take it just a completely, thoroughly, and totally different look at what they do and how they're doing it? So I'll ask again, where are the gaps? What can I help you with? Where are there any points where you're struggling with what we're talking about here, or do you have any ideas that you might like to share with somebody else in terms of how we can approach teaching soft skills, inculcating it into our CTE programs? Any thoughts, any ideas, any questions? Yes?
I totally agree on your work ethic thing, and believe me, that's what I think all of us in this room try to instill into our classrooms. I teach secondary, high school, and it's really hard sometimes when you see your kids are finally starting to get this, but then all of a sudden they stop coming. Maybe they're babysitting for mom. Maybe they have to take their dad to court. Maybe, they have this. The family wants them home to help out at home instead of coming to school. And that's a struggle I have sometimes. I don't know if anybody else does.
Is there anyone that doesn't have that? No, it is. I would.
And they're very honest about it. I didn't come to school today because I had to stay home and babysit. So I appreciate that.
And help me out, folks. What would you think? How would you respond? What's the issue, the challenge? What's that?
Learn behavior, that it's okay.
Yeah, just learn behavior. Yeah, it's that obviously that's acceptable and that's okay, and we all have our issues and what have you. A lot of the expectations get set in the early part of the program. When you first bring people together and you ask them, what do you want out of this? Here's where we're going. This is what's happening. And you kind of say, these are the situations that pop up. What are we going to do? How are we going to respond? Because there will be times where you need to stay home and babysit and blah, blah, blah. How do I view that? How do you view that? Is it right? Is it wrong? Because when you come into the workplace, do you think your employer is going to let you miss a day just because you had to stay home and babysit? Or because, this happened or that happened? What is excusable? When I talk about breaking the me bubble, the really cool opportunity that we have is to put somebody else in the role of, rather than a subservient employee, but if you ran your own thing, right? If you were the tour manager for a traveling rock band, right? And you got to be in Cincinnati tomorrow because you got a show, right? So you're counting on your bass player. And your bass player says, you know what, I kind of got hungover last night, or I think I got to stay home and take care of you got the show, right? What would you do? Or you're running this major league baseball team and your shortstop says, really, I just kind of had kind of an off day. So I just didn't want to show up for work. How do you deal with that? And you make the problem theirs. What would you do? Because if you start solving the problem from the position of you're the employer, you're the person in charge, here's the situation, the scenario we put you in, how do you deal with that? They can then begin to see it from more than just, well, this was really what I was dealing with and you don't understand. It's not whether I understand, it's whether you understand. Yes, Candy.
The other thing is it's the easy answer for the parent. So it's the parent saying, I need you to stay home to take care of the children, or to take care of the younger kids, instead of how do I solve this problem? So now they've learned that that the easy answer is the way to go. So if you can help them to see, how can I help my parent to figure out what is another avenue that they could take? Is there somebody else who can watch the child? Is there something else that can be done? It also helps them to see how they can help their family start to move past that as well.
Well, I guarantee you there's a lot of family dynamics. Everyone in here would testify that the family dynamic that takes place in schools now is drastically different than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, not even 5 years ago. The family dynamics have changed, and so we're dealing with situations and scenarios we never had to deal with before. And I don't have the answers to those questions. I'm not doing that on a daily basis. I don't know. I know I can come up in an audience like this with simplistic answers that sound funny and great. Do they work? I don't know. That's tough. You have a kid, you have somebody who says, I had to stay home and take care of this. My parents were out, I haven't seen my dad for the last 4 years, and my mom was out partying last night, and my kid brother, I don't know how to respond to that. I don't know.
I think it's interesting that you're saying that, though. What a perfect work ethic. If you think of it, in that I have to stay home and take care of my kid or my siblings. It may not be the best way to do it, but that is work ethic. There's other ways that kids could miss class. We have to twist it. We have to turn it to actually accentuate that work ethic again. And yes, it's uncomfortable or it's not really helpful that they're missing some of your assignments, but if you go back to what you had said, is how could we make this work? And I think that's the kind of conversation that you would have, because otherwise, sitting in my seat as a counselor, I look at family situations where parents are working 2-3 jobs, and there is no way to get something done that they know about. And they're doing the best that they can at the time. And so how can we twist it and get what we want to have happen, and they also get to appreciate that with that work ethic?
I think that what comes along with that, because I've had this exact same situation happen to me, and the safety of the brothers and sisters, we're looking at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy here, the safety of those family members. That child really didn't have they had to stay there for the safety of whatever. And so I offered up to see the value of it. Well, we really missed you in class. And so, I'm staying after school today, or I could stay after school tomorrow, and I'd like to go over the information that we went over, and I'd be happy to spend time with you one-on-one. Then I get to know the student better and the situation and talk a little bit about it. And is there somebody I can connect that family with to get them help on the social end of it so that this student can excel and be successful? And then you see how much the student wants to buy in. And sometimes if you get that student on one-on-one, because I've done this numerous times, it's like you really understand the perspective.
I think the hard thing would be for me, in that particular situation, I wouldn't want someone to say, here's what happened publicly, and me to acknowledge and let the person off the hook, so to speak, because what I'm saying is, and if you have a situation that's hard, just talk about it and it's all okay. It's trying to find that balance where it's like talk to me individually. And if it happens once in a while, great. If I have to go outside the bounds, look for resources to help alleviate a situation that may be taking place at home, great, we'll do that. I do believe in the one-on-one, and I think how important that is in those key situations. But you think about how the workplace is, and if we're in this bridge, which is the word we've used today, bridging between, what's the workplace going to do? 90% of the workplaces are going to say, if you can't show up, I can't be responsible for what happens at home. I can bleed for you. I can say I'm sorry, but I need to open my business. This is the scenario. You're going to have to work that detail out. And there's only a few short years between being this kid that's got to watch younger siblings and being this employee in the workplace. And if that's why employers are saying, well, they come in with these expectations because it worked at school and it doesn't work in the workplace. Yes?
We're kind of trying to be their parent and school them in that part. And I get totally what you're saying about the work ethic, because I believe in that. But it's like we're trying to help them as part of their family, and then, I don't know, it's a tough challenge.
Well, I'm not saying that by not going to school that they've showed a good work ethic or a bad. That's not the point. The point is, when life is hitting you, as hard as it is, and we're all getting hit. I mean, there's crap that happens all the time. There's so much to do, not enough time to do it in. And one of the greatest tools that we can teach is, when these situations happen, how can you navigate your way through them? You'd hate to see somebody lose their job because of factors that they could have controlled had they learned how perhaps to prioritize, to look at, operational management. I don't know what that is. So yeah, there's no easy answer. And we listen to, I'm sure we all listen to way more stories that tug at your heart. And you go, I believe the kid, and this was really the situation, and this is what happened. How can we help them past that so that perhaps maybe, I just would hate to say, well, let me just give you a pass on that, knowing that that employer next year isn't going to give them a pass on it. And if I let them go out into the business world thinking that that's going to help them and they're going to wind up losing jobs and getting passed over and stuff, I'm doing a disservice. So you got to bridge that somehow.
And the other thought is that for not only in a job, they're going to be in college in a year or two, and colleges a lot of teachers aren't that understanding about all your personal problems, because I teach at a college and that's all we hear.
Comes down to
I couldn't get a
performance.
babysitter, whatever, all these personal problems, and it really interferes with their college. So I agree with you, they need to learn how to solve those life problems.
Yeah,
And I don't know what the answer is.
I don't know what the answer is. I just know that performance matters, and not a whole lot else matters. It's just your performance. So, other thoughts? Do you want to take it down another direction? Anybody else? I see a hand go back out there.
Well, I just think all of this conversation, it's just so indicative of where we're at right now in the world, and as educators, it's not like when, well, I can speak for my age group, but not like when I went to school, and mom and dad were at home and all those things. The world has just changed so much, and it isn't simple anymore. It would be a treat if it were kind of simple and easy, and we had the moms and dads at home, and the kids didn't have to stay at home and babysit the kids. But I agree with what you're saying, because I started a kid on a new job yesterday, and the second thing out of his mouth was, "Oh, well, I have a field trip. Do you think I can go on Friday?" And I said, "Absolutely not. You just started a job today. You're not going to go on a field trip." So it's that whole expectation of, what are we entitled to, and they have to get away from that, what they're entitled to. It's what can they bring to the workforce.
Well, we really are the bridge. We are standing in the gap and teaching people about what's taking place in the workplace, and not taking for granted that their parents have already taught them that. And now all we have to do is just, give them a few skills and send them out there, because you're right. They don't know. They don't get it. An excuse will work at school. I get 6 unexcused absences or 5 tardies and it doesn't play in the workplace. And so being able to share that, here's what works, performance matters, etc. Here's what's happening. have employers talk to them, put them in face-to-face, and all you can do is kind of share with them the rules of the workplace and try to model those in your classrooms, and maybe good things will happen.
I think we could probably stay and talk with you all afternoon, Eric. In fact, your table is out in the
Yeah, I'll be
in the
out there
back?
for a few minutes, and
Can
then I'll
you
be
stay
heading to
for
the
a
airport.
while?
Sure.
And talk to folks. We need to thank Eric for coming this afternoon.
Thank you,
with
Debbie.
us.
Thank you very much.